Hogwarts, Grey Demon Lord's Rise in Wizarding World. Like, share and subscribe. Episode 76, Luna. Alvin saw that Astoria was not good at this kind of scene, so he beckoned. Astoria, come to my side. Hearing Alvin's call, Astoria breathed a sigh of relief, got rid of the entanglement of the little witch next to him, and hid behind Alvin. At this moment, the door was opened, and Professor Flitwick came over and asked Alvin, "Alvin, how is the situation here? The sorting ceremony will start in a while." Professor McGonagall met Professor Flitwick on the way, and she was afraid that Alvin would not be able to control these little wizards, so she asked Flitwick to come over and help take a look. However, Flitwick was relieved to see that the group of freshmen in front of him was still honest. "It's okay, Professor, everything is normal here. Is the sorting ceremony about to begin?" Alvin replied, and asked when the house would be sorted. He was now a little upset by these little wizards. Professor Flitwick shook his head and said it would take a while, and he saw that Alvin managed the new students well, so he simply taught Alvin everything and left here. After all, his height is not suitable for helping the little wizard put on a sorting hat for sorting, and it is good to have Alvin's help. Seeing that his dean appeared and slipped away, Alvin also twitched the corners of his mouth. "There are a lot of harassment around you." An ethereal voice remembered. Alvin looked over, and the little witch looked around Alvin with a pair of godless eyes, muttering to herself, "This girl has rare silver eyes, dark blonde hair is messily scattered behind, and some of it is braided. A pair of turnip earrings were worn on both ears, and a necklace made of butterbeer was worn around his fair neck. The whole person looks like there is some weird beauty. What do you say?" "What is harassment?" Alvin was a little confused, how he hadn't heard of this magical beast. "Can't you see them? Also, many people don't believe they exist, so they don't see harassment." Her expression was a little trance-like, and combined with her ethereal self-talk, Alvin felt a little unreal. She continued, "Harassment will float into people's ears, mess up their brains, and cause trouble." Alvin felt a little inexplicable, but this little witch gave him a somewhat familiar feeling. It should be a character that appeared in the original book. Alvin asked with interest, "What's your name?" "Luna Lovegood." Alvin suddenly, sure enough, this one was no less popular than Hermione in the original world. This ethereal temperament, delicate face, and that unique charm, no wonder a group of 1SP in the previous life shouted their wives and wives in the comment area all day. Knowing that it was her, Alvin was not surprised by this remark. This girl was originally a little strange, and later everyone in the school called her a crazy girl. "Then can you help me get rid of these harassments?" Alvin asked rhetorically, wanting to see how the little witch reacted. Astoria, who was hiding behind him, couldn't help it. She was a little upset, although she didn't know why. But this girl obviously didn't know Alvin and came up to talk, and also pulled out the unheard creature of harassment mood to attract Alvin's attention. Real tea. There is no such creature at all, and Newt Scamander's fantastic beasts and where to find them doesn't mention any harassment. Astoria's retort didn't make Luna react, and she thought quietly, as if trying to think of a way to expel the harasser. This made Astoria even more unhappy. After a moment, Luna shook her head. "I'm sorry, I can't do it." Astoria saw her say this, and immediately wanted to say something, but was interrupted by Alvin. "Then there is no way, you can only let the harasser lead by himself." "All right, gentlemen and ladies. Cue up, and we're ready to go to the sorting ceremony." Alvin saw Professor Flitwick behind the door and waved at him, and also stopped making small talk. Led the young wizards into the hall. When Alvin entered the hall with a group of young wizards, it immediately attracted the attention of the audience. "Ask for flowers." Everyone did not expect that this year it was not Professor McGonagall who brought this group of freshmen to the sorting ceremony, but Alvin, a second-year student. For a while, the sound of discussion came from all four tables. Alvin glanced at the professor's seat and saw that Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall were not in place. Even Snape's absence made the professorship seem a little empty. As the sorting hat finished singing that annual rotten song, the sorting ceremony began. Alvin shouted the names of the little wizards in turn and performed the sorting ceremony for them. Lockhart on the stage looked at Alvin enviously. Why didn't he expect such a showy thing? Turning to look at Professor Flitwick, he asked who this little wizard was. Flitwick proudly replied, "This is Mr. Alvin Gaunt, the best student at Hogwarts in 50 years. It's the pride of our Ravenclaws." Lockhart heard that Flitwick would have such a high opinion of a second-year young wizard, and couldn't help but look at Alvin a few times and write him down. "Maybe you can let this little wizard share his adventures in the future?" Halfway through the sorting ceremony, Alvin saw the door of the Great Hall open and Harry and Ron sneak in, covered in dirt and embarrassment. However, he didn't have time to pay attention to them now, so he took a look and continued to sort the next little wizard. Finally, having successfully assigned the last young wizard to Hufflepuff, Alvin also completed his task and returned to the Ravenclaw table. A few Ravenclaw students greeted him and then asked why Alvin had come to hold the sorting ceremony today. Alvin casually coped with a few words, confused the matter, and waited for today's dinner. Cho on the side pulled his sleeve and asked in a low voice, "Potter and Weasley won't be fired, will they?" "Don't worry, Headmaster Dumbledore won't allow such a thing to happen." Alvin replied affirmatively. At this moment, Snape walked in through the side door. 7. Episode 77, Healing the Beating Willow. Snape's face was very bad, as if someone owed him 100,000 galleons. When a little wizard saw him like this, he stared at Snape curiously, wanting to know what had happened. Although Snape usually has an old face, it is rare to see such a smelly appearance as today. But instead of stepping up to the professor's chair, Snape stood in the doorway and shouted into the great hall, "Professor Sprout, please come with me, and you, Alvin." Alvin was stunned. How can this still have its own business? Looking at the steak on the table, Alvin hesitated to pretend not to hear. This brightly colored steak was constantly tempting him. Snape and Alvin had known each other for a year, had known his temper for a long time, and repeated it again. "Alvin, come here now. Don't take it for granted." There was no way, so I had to put a bite of beef into my mouth fiercely, then stood up and walked over. "Professor, I feel like I need to supplement some nutrition now, instead of showing up here." Walking up to Snape, Alvin complained to him. Snape directly ignored him and said to Professor Sprout, "Professor Sprout, there is something wrong with beating Willow. I am afraid that my judgment is inaccurate, so I need your help." When Professor Sprout heard this, her expression became serious. She nodded, and followed Snape outside, and Alvin had to follow. Along the way, Snape also told Professor Sprazzy about Harry and Ron driving into a beating Willow. I could hear that there was some schadenfreude when he said this, as if tomorrow the two would pack up and leave. The three of them came to the beating Willow, and Professor Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall were already waiting here. At this time, the beating Willow looked very manic, countless branches waved in the air, and everyone could only stand far away. Professor Sprout didn't talk nonsense, and directly stepped forward to appease the manic beating Willow. The Hufflepuff Dean was a master herbalist, and within minutes she calmed down the beater, and then she checked on the beater's injury. Sprout's brows wrinkled, walked back, and said to Dumbledore with some concern, "The beating Willow was injured a little badly. The car hit the main trunk of the beating Willow, and it needs to be repaired immediately with life essence, otherwise, it will affect his lifespan." Except for Alvin, everyone else looked at Snape, and Snape did not speak, but looked at Alvin at this point. Alvin finally understood why Professor Snape had called him over. He had secretly refined something for himself from Snape's raw materials when he was practicing refining potions at Snape's before, and this life essence was one of them. Originally, he thought of using these raw solutions to cultivate some medicinal materials by himself and achieve self-sufficiency. However, he did not expect Snape to be so clear about this matter, and turned a blind eye to say nothing, until now when there was a need. The corners of his mouth twitched, and he cursed LYB secretly, but Alvin still looked at Professor McGonagall. "Professor McGonagall, please give me a location for my luggage. I have a bottle of life essence in my luggage." Professor McGonagall said a location, and Alvin pulled out his wand and cast a flying spell. Soon, his luggage flew from the castle, automatically dodging various obstacles along the way. "Professor Flitwick will be proud of you, Gaunt." Professor McGonagall couldn't help but praise when she saw such a wonderful flying spell. Alvin smiled, opened the luggage, tinkered for a while, found the space bag for the potion, and then pulled out a green potion bottle. Handing the potion to Professor Sprout opened it and took a closer look, a little surprised. "Gaunt, I didn't expect your potion refining level to be so high. And the quality of this bottle of life source liquid is very good." Immediately, she put all of this bottle of life source liquid on the wound of the beating Willow, and a brilliant green light immediately appeared on the wound, and it was still shrinking. At this time, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Beating Willow is one of Hogwarts' hallmarks, and he hasn't suffered such a big injury since he planted it decades ago. Several professors also have a lot of affection for it, and they are naturally very happy to see the beating Willow return to its original state. Dumbledore smiled and said, "Congratulations, Gaunt, for earning Ravenclaw 50 points on the first day of the new school year." Alvin nodded. He had no interest in extra points for a long time. He just wanted to go back now to see if he could catch the tail of the banquet and eat something. At this point, Snape spoke. "Since it's okay to hit Willow, then we should still discuss the punishment for Porter and Weasley. They've been in a lot of trouble along the way. At least 7 muggles have seen their cars flying in the sky, and tomorrow this will be on the Daily Prophet, and I recommend firing them." The more Snape spoke, the more he became, and at the end of the day a smile appeared on his face. Alvin said that it was really a long time to see Snape and have such a happy day of laughing. "Severus," Dumbledore interrupted Snape, who wanted to continue, and said calmly to him, "Let Minerva decide on this matter. After all, they are Gryffindor students." After Dumbledore finished speaking, Snape's expression turned ugly again, which made Alvin next to him can't help but laugh. When Snape also learned to change his face, Snape glared at the snickering Alvin, and without saying a word, left the place. "Okay, we should go back too. Please go and call Harry and Ron to Professor McGonagall's office, Alvin." Alvin nodded and walked towards the castle as well. Entering the great hall, Alvin looked in the direction of the Gryffindor table and saw a fidgeting Harry and Ron. The two stared at the food in front of them without the slightest movement, obviously very worried about what kind of punishment they would receive. "Harry." After walking 57 over, Alvin patted Harry on the shoulder and startled him. "Professor McGonagall asked you and Ron to go to her office." Alvin sent a message to Harry and Ron with a serious face, looking like you were going to be unlucky. Hearing Alvin's words, with his tone, the faces of the two instantly turned pale. Ron muttered, "Dead, I'm fired." Alvin, who listened, laughed secretly. He still thinks it's funny not to tell them that it's basically nothing this time, and it's fun to scare them. Watching Harry and the two of them holding each other towards the stairs, as if they were about to fall at any moment, Alvin smiled unscrupulously. When Alvin returned to Cho's side and just sat down, and was about to pick up a steak, all the food suddenly disappeared, and the whole person turned gray. Ron and Ginny died in the 78th Society. The next morning, Alvin and Cho arrived at the auditorium together. Last night, because he didn't make it to dinner, Alvin secretly went to the kitchen late at night, got himself a late-night snack, and returned to the bedroom in the early hours of the morning. He is already familiar with this set of processes, and specially asked the house elves to make him a kung pao chicken and boiled fish after eating. He couldn't sleep anymore, and he didn't fall asleep until 4 o'clock in the morning, and the whole person is still in a state of wandering. Eating the bread and jam on the table, Alvin and Cho chatted about this semester's classes, and Cho listened to Alvin and Cho's ancient magic this semester. But she is a little nervous now. She has never known much about ancient magic, and now Alvin is popularizing some basic knowledge for her. At this moment, hundreds of owls suddenly flew in from outside, fluttering their wings to deliver the little wizard's letters and packages to them. 17 One of the owls flew to Ron's side with all his might, and then finally couldn't hold on and fell into a large basin of milk at once, splash a large swath of milk and feathers. Ron and Neville ignored the old owl, which looked like it was dying, and instead looked in horror at the red envelope sent by the owl, as if it was not a letter. But a time bomb Harry next to him didn't quite understand why Ron and Neville had such expressions. There was a deep fear in Neville's voice, as if recalling something bad. Roar letter. Ron, you'd better turn him on. Ron trembled and reached out to open the envelope. It's a pity it's late, and the corners of the envelope are already starting to smoke. A frantic roar from Mrs. Weasley came, and the contents of the letter were heard throughout the great hall. At this time, Ron's face turned red, and he couldn't say a word, and he couldn't wait to find a gap in the ground to get in. Ginny on the side was also uncomfortable, and Mrs. Weasley finally said a word of congratulations on her entry into Gryffindor, which suddenly made her the focus of the audience. Alvin watched this scene with a smile. This was the moment of death of the Weasley siblings, and Mrs. Weasley's voice seemed to be able to shatter the ceiling. They're so pathetic. If my mom had sent such a yelling letter, I think I'd be considering dropping out of Hogwarts by now. Cho sympathizes with what happened to Ron and Ginny. Alvin didn't think so, and Mr. Weasley, as head of the Ministry of Magic's Department for the Prohibition of the Misuse of Muggle Items, was itself to prevent wizards from arbitrarily modifying Muggle products. Now Ron is making such a fuss that he directly put Mr. Weasley on the fire and roasted it, if it weren't for the fact that Mr. Weasley had left himself a few loopholes when he wrote the Muggle Protection Act. I'm afraid he's now expelled from the Ministry of Magic and even faces additional punishment. Mrs. Weasley was also a housewife, and the family's breadwinner depended on Mr. Weasley alone. I can't imagine what kind of disaster Mr. Weasley would bring to their family when he lost his job, and Mrs. Weasley only scolded Ron, which was already considered a biological treatment. Not entangled in this matter, Alvin and Cho parted, went to the herbal medicine classroom and began the first class of the semester. When Alvin arrived at the classroom, Professor Sprout greeted him amicably. After seeing the life essence refined by Alvin yesterday, Professor Sprout became even more fond of this genius little wizard. Alright, students. Welcome back to Hogwarts. Clapping his hands, Professor Sprout attracted the attention of all the students and began lecturing. Today, Alvin, they are going to learn about Mandrake. Mandrake is a powerful restorative used to restore a deformed person or a person under a spell. The grass roots of this grass grow like a very ugly baby, the leaves are on his head, and when the mandrakes are pulled out of the grass roots, he will scream. This scream is so terrifying that it can even lead to the death of a wizard, but what they are now exposed to is not mature mandrake, but juvenile. Sometimes Alvin wonders, does Dumbledore know that this year's quest is a basilisk, so he specially prepared mandrake? But it's not right. Looking directly into the eyes of the basilisk will lead to the death of the wizard, and the petrified little wizards in the original book are indirectly looking at the basilisk and survived. At the end of the class, many young wizards were tormented by the shrill cries of mandrakes. Neville, in particular, fainted directly because he didn't wear earmuffs. Alvin intimately released an earplug-closing listening spell for Hermione and himself, and the two could not hear the outside world at all. The whole class was communicating with gestures, which made Alvin feel very interesting. They also have a defense against the dark arts class in the afternoon. Alvin and Hermione had no hope for the course taught by this liar, even Harry. He was disgusted by being photographed by Lockhart, so when Alvin said that Lockhart was a liar, he believed it without hesitation. However, other wizards, especially the little witch, were full of 333 expectations for this lesson. After all, Lockhart wrapped himself up so well that everyone thought he was a strong wizard. Soon, Lockhart walked in with a smile on his face. His eyes lit up even more when he saw Harry. Harry! Professor Lockhart. Harry forced himself into an ugly smile and greeted Lockhart, but Lockhart, as if not seeing his reluctance, walked to his side and grabbed Harry's shoulder familiarly. I understand the mood of young people who like to break up. After all, the taste of headlines is unforgettable, Lockhart said to Harry in a familiar tone. Professor, Harry tried to retort, but Lockhart patted him, and before he could finish, he continued to speak. I know, blame me, let you taste famous, but you can't drive in the sky either. Lockhart's serious look made some classmates who did not know the truth of the matter look at him adoringly. I didn't expect Lockhart to write so well and care so much about students, it's amazing. And Erwin and Hermione, who knew the inside story, gloated and watched Harry being tortured by Lockhart. Episode 79, Farce and Defense Against the Dark Arts Class. You don't help me. After the class bell rang, Lockhart finally let Harry go and walked up to the podium. Harry whispered to Erwin, who hadn't settled with Erwin about scaring him and Ron yesterday unexpectedly. Erwin pitted him again today. Erwin and Hermione held back a smile, and Erwin replied solemnly, after all, we are not famous Harry Potter, and we don't want to enjoy the feeling of being famous. Hearing the ridicule in Erwin's tone, Harry glanced at Erwin and Hermione unhappily. He hated Lockhart very much, but unfortunately since the last time he was forced to take a group photo at Lycan bookstore, Lockhart has become his defense against the dark arts professor, which is simply haunted. Lockhart looked at the little wizard below and introduced himself with a smile. The long list of useless titles made Erwin have a toothache when he listened. However, Lockhart is actually a Merlin Medal recipient, which is a little surprising to Erwin, but he did not expect that this liar professor could actually deceive the Whimsical gang of judges. The Order of Sir Merlin is a very precious honor, and it is not necessary to issue one in 10 years. Erwin felt that this title was still very useful, helping to improve his reputation in the wizarding world, and thought about when he would go to get a piece of it himself. Soon Lockhart handed out a few test papers, and Erwin took it in his hand and looked at it. 1. What is Gerard Lockhart's favorite color? 2. What is Gerard Lockhart's secret ambition? The entire 3 pages were all about Lockhart's personal problems, not even a single one related to defense against the dark arts. Erwin threw the test paper aside directly, not looking at it, and the province polluted his eyes. Although Hermione and Harry also hated Lockhart, after all, as students, they still did not dare to let them hand over the blank paper, so they had to write. Half an hour later, Lockhart put away the test papers and turned them over one by one. Gee, almost no one remembers that I like lilacs. I mentioned it in A Year with a Tibetan Snowman. Ever. Well? Erwin Gaunt? Why did you hand over a blank paper? Don't you even know my birthday? When Lockhart flipped through Erwin's paper, he frowned and questioned a little unhappily. Stretching, Erwin replied nonchalantly, I really don't know about these boring things. Lockhart didn't expect Erwin to be so direct. He already remembered who Erwin was, the Ravenclaw little wizard who held the sorting ceremony yesterday. Thinking of what Professor Flitwick had said to him, he didn't dare to rebuke Erwin too much. I could only say with a smirk, it's okay, I'll publish the standard answer in a moment. These things will be very helpful for you. Erwin is a little upset. Why is this Lockhart endless? I didn't debunk him already for Dumbledore's face, but I didn't expect Lockhart to still find trouble for himself. Thinking of this, Erwin stood up and asked in a mocking tone, May I ask Professor Lockhart, I know your birthday will allow me to learn new spells? Do I know your favorite color will allow me to successfully fend off dangerous magical beasts? Hearing Erwin's unceremonious questioning, Lockhart's face turned blue for a while, and he didn't know how to answer. He didn't expect that his first class would have such a prickly student. The other little wizards were also very dissatisfied with Lockhart's test paper, and simply looked lively. Lockhart held his breath for a long time without saying a word, and could only selectively ignore Erwin's question to divert everyone's attention. He took out a cage covered with silk cloth. Now, be careful, my mission is to defend you against the most evil things known to the wizarding world. You're going to see horrible things, but don't worry, because I'm here. Lockhart's words were very attractive, and quickly diverted the attention of the young wizards. Everyone stared at the covered cage, trying to know what was inside. Loha held his breath and lifted the silk cloth. Suddenly the cage revealed its true face, and it was filled with Cornish elves. Whoosh! Seamus of Gryffindor couldn't help but laugh, and when he heard him laugh, many little wizards couldn't help but laugh too. These little wizards of the vocal wizard family know that the Cornish elves are already the lowest dangerous monsters. As a result, Lockhart described them so exaggeratedly, which made the little wizards really can't help but laugh. Lockhart was a little annoyed and opened the cage in a fit of anger. Now the classroom was chaotic. Dozens of elves rushed out, wantonly destroying. Neville was grabbed by 2 ears and flew up, and a few directly smashed the glass and rushed out of the window. Lockhart was also a little panicked. He took out his wand and recited an unknown spell, but it was useless, and the wand was grabbed by the elf and thrown out of the window. Embarrassed to protect his head, Lockhart opened the door of the classroom and shouted, Your mission in this class is to get these elves back. After speaking, he ran out of the classroom without looking back and closed the door. Hermione couldn't stand it anymore, and used the freezing curse to freeze the activities of these elves. Neville also threw himself out of the air, rubbing it there in pain. The end of class bell rang, and a farce was finally over. The young wizards left the classroom as if they were fleeing for their lives. I can't understand why Professor Dumbledore invited such a liar to teach us. In the hallway, Hermione complained to Erwin. Harry next to him nodded frantically in agreement. I guess no one dares to apply for this position. You know, the defense against the dark arts professor at Hogwarts is a consumable, and no one can sit in this position for a year forever. Erwin shrugged and answered Hermione, Consumables? Harry and Hermione came interested. They didn't know these things yet. It is said that Voldemort approached Dumbledore and said that he wanted to stay in school and become a defense against the dark arts teacher, but Dumbledore refused. When Voldemort became the Dark Lord, a curse was placed on the position in his name. Alvin patiently explained the reason to the two. Hearing this, Harry and Hermione suddenly realized and suddenly understood Dumbledore. After all, this position consumes one professor a year. It is estimated that Dumbledore could not find a more suitable person, and at this time Lockhart suddenly agreed, something is better than nothing, right? Episode 80, Alvin's Small Class, Mudblood. After thinking it through, Hermione's expression didn't improve. Then we won't learn anything for another year? In the first grade, Quirrell tried to disguise himself, but as a result, he did not teach any useful knowledge, and only knew to read the textbook according to the script. As a result, in the second year, I had hoped to have a reliable defense against the dark arts professor, but it turned out that Lockhart was so speechless, which was also depressed by Hermione. Looking at the little witch like this, Alvin hesitated for a few seconds, but still spoke. Or shall I take the time to teach you? Hermione's eyes lit up when she heard Alvin's words. Yes, Alvin is so powerful. He was able to fight Voldemort back and forth last semester. Isn't it more than enough to teach her such a second-year little wizard? Hermione nodded happily, and Harry next to her looked at this scene enviously. Alvin saw Harry's look and said, "You can come if you want, Harry, but you have to be prepared, you'll be tired, and you'll have to go to Quidditch training." Harry immediately turned his worries into joy. He had also realized the importance of strength since the end of last semester, and he could only hide in a corner and shiver when Alvin and Voldemort were fighting. This also made Harry feel deep powerlessness, and he really wanted to fight side by side with his friends. The three of them agreed on a time, and every weekend after that, Alvin would tutor them in defense against the dark arts class. Alvin feels that the wizarding world will become more and more dangerous in the future, and Hermione and Cho have good talent for spells. But 120 is their basic magic power is too low, even if they learn spells, using them is standard power, so he decided to open a small stove for the two women. He had obtained a lot of precious herbs from Nicholas Flamel, which he could refine to increase the magic scale for them to administer, and Alvin decided to take them to the room of requirement to practice, where the words were more hidden and would not attract the attention of other young wizards. For the next few days, Alvin wondered who the diary had fallen into through the relationship of the Weasley twins. Alvin and Ginny also know each other. In the small talk of the past few days, Alvin intentionally or unintentionally mentioned the diary, but Ginny didn't react at all, and it didn't seem like she had been spoken. If the diary is no longer with Ginny, then this becomes troublesome. Alvin knew that the advantage of the plot was gone. Once the plot changes, he is also unlikely to guarantee the safety of Cho and Hermione. You must know that the basilisk's magic eye is a straight death skill. At that time, if there is any accident between them, Alvin really has no place to cry. Therefore, he has been observing this new batch of students these days. The two girls thought that Alvin was looking for a beautiful little girl again. Alvin also encountered a troublesome thing in the past few days. Colin Clevey, the first-year Gryffindor freshman, heard from others about Alvin's glorious deeds last semester. He immediately adored Alvin and had to take pictures of him to record the life of a genius wizard, which made Alvin a little annoyed. But Harry was happy, and Colin was busy tracking Alvin and wouldn't have come to him for trouble. On Saturday, Cho and Hermione were walking on the lawn, and the two of them now had a very good relationship, sometimes going out without even taking Alvin, saying that the conversation between girls could not let the boys know, making Alvin very speechless. But the relationship between the two people is good, which is also what Alvin is happy to see. After all, he didn't want to be restless. This morning, while Alvin was still asleep, Cho and Hermione went for a walk on the lawn here after breakfast, talking about these girl-specific topics. Hermione's eyes sharpened as she saw Harry walking towards the Quidditch pitch with a broom and greeting him. Harry saw Hermione and came over too. "Good morning, Hermione." "Good morning, Autumn." Harry stuttered a little when he greeted Cho, not daring to look up at her. Harry didn't feel much about Alvin finding Hermione as his girlfriend, but Cho, his heart raced every time he saw it. However, he also knew that Cho was Alvin's girlfriend, and he could only envy him in his heart. Not only is the person handsome, studying is good, and the girlfriend is so beautiful, Harry is really sour. "What's going on? How are you listless?" Hermione saw that Harry was in a bad state and asked suspiciously. "Not would yet. Pulled us up early in the morning for some tactical meeting, and I didn't even eat breakfast," Harry said bitterly. Although Harry didn't miss the final Quidditch final last semester like the original, Alvin's outstanding performance shattered Wood's dream of being a champion. This semester, Wood was like a chicken blood, calling all the players up early to listen to his tactical lessons. Poor Harry didn't even eat breakfast, so he watched Wood point to the arrows swimming on the tactical board and talk about tactics for nearly 2 hours. Well, he also hopes that you can have a good result this year. Hermione listened to Harry's complaints, and there was nothing she could do. Because of Alvin's relationship, Hermione was not very embarrassed to cheer for Harry, and could only comfort him with 2 words. Cho next to her kept smiling softly, but she firmly believed in her heart, as long as Ravenclaw has Alvin and her, this year's Quidditch Cup must be theirs. The three chatted casually, and Harry hurried into the Quidditch pitch to practice. Hermione and Cho continued to chat about the girls' little secret, but only moments later, Hermione and Cho saw Malfoy and a group of Slytherin students enter the Quidditch pitch as well. "Didn't Wood already book a venue today?" Why would the Slytherins still come? Hermione was a little worried and wanted to go over and take a look. Cho was also a little curious. If she was not mistaken, those Slytherin players had Light Wheel 2001 in their hands, right? As the owner of Light Wheel 2001, Cho was familiar with the shape of this broom. She also wanted to see if the Slytherins had all been replaced with Light Wheel 2001, and if so, this year's Slytherins would be stronger. When the two walked into the Quidditch pitch, they saw Malfoy triumphantly holding a flying broomstick, showing off to the Gryffindor players. Pretty good, isn't it? However, if your family is willing to sell the house, they may be able to exchange 2 Light Wheels for you in 2001. Do you think I'm right? Weasley, hearing Malfoy's harsh words, Hermione couldn't hold back any longer and stepped forward and said angrily, "At least, not a single Gryffindor player has to spend money to join the team." Malfoy's proud face instantly turned ugly, and Hermione's words poked straight into his heart. He knew Hermione was right, and while his talent was good, it was still too whimsical to get into the team as a seeker in his second year. The Gryffindor team members also burst out laughing when they heard this, mocking Malfoy madly. "No one asked you, you stinky mudblood," Malfoy said viciously. This sentence immediately caused an explosive reaction. George and Fred rushed towards Malfoy in an instant, but were stopped by Marcus Flint, the Slytherin Quidditch captain. Ron also took out his folded wand and aimed it at Malfoy as a curse. Unfortunately, his wand has been ineffective since it broke, and this time Ron was very unfortunate that the spell hit Ron directly from the back of the wand. It just blasted Ron away. When the Slytherin team saw this, they were first stunned, then laughing madly. Malfoy's smile, in particular, was breathless, and the way he leaned forward and back seemed very pompous. There was a desire to reason with Malfoy, but Ron couldn't stop vomiting some slugs, and Harry and they could only take Ron to the school infirmary first. And at this moment, a cold voice came from the door. "Malfoy, can you repeat that word you just said in front of me?" Episode 81, Don't Even Want to Run. When everyone heard this voice, they couldn't help but shiver and looked in the direction where the voice came from. Alvin. Although there is a strong contrast with the usual gentle tone, but Cho and Hermione immediately heard who the owner of the voice was. The two looked at Alvin standing at the entrance in surprise, and walked towards here step by step. Alvin nodded softly at them, then set his eyes on Malfoy's body, instantly becoming extremely cold. "Malfoy, do you dare to repeat that word in front of me?" Alvin approached Malfoy step by step. The robe on his body was windless, and the whole person exuded a fierce momentum. The powerful magic oppresses everyone and makes them breathe. At this time, Malfoy's face was already pale with fright. In fact, he regretted it a little after he said it. He knew that the relationship between this Gryffindor witch and Alvin was somewhat unclear. Malfoy was smart, he knew it after his trip to the Forbidden Forest last semester. Alvin and he are not a hierarchical existence. He is by no means a good guy to provoke. He had never had a conflict with Alvin all this time, but today's Hermione's words were too sharp, directly hitting his sore spot, and he would be so speechless. Unexpectedly, it was this time that he was hit by Alvin. Thinking of Alvin's methods, he was even more frightened. Alvin would not burn him to death. Marcus on the side saw Alvin so arrogantly coming up to question Malfoy, a little unbearable, walked forward a few steps, and his tall body blocked Malfoy behind. "Boy, your name is Alvin Gaunt, isn't there? Is there something wrong with the mudblood that Draco just said?" He thought he was in 7th year and was the captain of Slytherin, and he didn't take Alvin seriously in his opinion. What can a wizard and genius do? Is he not a second-grade little ghost head? Fight back quickly. Alvin moved without warning, and a flying spell knocked Marcus directly away, slamming into the wall under the stands. The huge force directly smashed the wall out of a big pit, and Marcus only had time to let out a scream and fainted directly when the others saw Alvin making such a move. They were immediately furious, and they took out their wands and aimed at Alvin. Crook stick. Leg stiffen and stop. All petrified. The Gryffindor team members next to him did not expect the situation to develop so violently, and did not react. By the time they were ready to fight back, the Slytherin spell had reached Alvin's side, and they could only watch. "Alvin!" George and Fred cried out worriedly, but soon realized something was wrong. All the spells stopped at the moment when they were about to hit Alvin. Levitating in front of Alvin, Alvin waved his hand, and immediately these spells returned the same way and hit the Slytherin team. The Slytherins who were hit fell into bad luck. One person's front teeth suddenly became larger, directly extended their chin, and one person immediately fell to the ground with both legs. The worst person used the evil spell that Ron wanted to use just now, and was lying on the ground at this time, vomiting frantically, and slugs came out of his mouth. Disgusting. The Gryffindor team members were first stunned when they saw this scene, and then burst out laughing. I didn't expect these people in Slytherin to be so wasteful and hit so badly by the spell they issued. Alvin ignored the misery of these people and looked at Malfoy. At this time, Malfoy had collapsed to the ground, and when he saw Alvin's gaze, he crawled backwards. Alvin directly suspended him in the air with the floating charm, thinking about how to punish the culprit. Suddenly he remembered that in the 4th part, Moody, who was pretending to be Crouch, directly turned Malfoy into a stoat, slapping back and forth like a leather ball, and suddenly had an idea. Using the dirt on the ground to conjure up a rolling cage, and then turning Malfoy, who was struggling in the air, into a hamster that Malfoy had turned into, and letting him run nonstop in the cage. Alvin nodded with satisfaction. "Alvin, are you okay with this?" Hermione was a little worried about whether Alvin would be punished for this. "Don't worry, Hermione," Malfoy said a very excessive word just now. "I'm sure Professor Snape won't blame me when he finds out." Alvin wasn't worried in the slightest, not to mention his current delicate relationship with Snape. Just to say that the word mudblood was an absolute taboo for Snape. If Snape knew that Malfoy had used the word, Alvin was sure he would be worse off than he is now. "Let's go. This transfiguration spell will expire tomorrow, and he will be able to transform back then. Ask for flowers." Glancing at the hamsters running wildly in the cage, Alvin said to Hermione and Cho, "Well, you're okay. I don't care what Malfoy says. After all, I don't know the meaning of the word." Hermione nodded in agreement, and then comforted Alvin, who had been extremely angry just now that Hermione had never seen before. Although the little witch liked the feeling of being protected by Alvin, she didn't want Alvin to be in a bad mood because of herself. Looking at Hermione's worried look, Alvin raised his hand and rubbed her shaggy hair until it made a mess. The little witch looked at Alvin angrily, and she also knew that this was Alvin diverting her attention and telling her not to think about it after saying hello to the people on the Gryffindor team and helping Ron lift the curse. By the way, Alvin left with the two daughters. Looking at the departing Alvin, the hamsters in the cage made a squeaky sound, but unfortunately no one could understand what they were saying. Harry and the rest of the Gryffindor team looked at each other, but today they could not train anymore, so they had to cancel today's plans, and the group left the Quidditch arena, leaving behind a group of fallen Slytherins and a squeaky hamster. Naturally, word of the big thing that happened here quickly spread among the young wizards, and some Slytherin students tried to undo Malfoy's curse, but failed. They had to take Malfoy to Snape. "What's going on?" Snape looked at the hamster and said with a gloomy face, blatantly transforming the students of his own house. Did he not put him as the dean in his eyes? Several Slytherins, who had lifted the curse, looked at each other and told each other what had happened, but concealed the fact that Malfoy had provoked first. When he heard that it was Alvin's hand, Snape tugged at the corners of his mouth, waved his hand, and let a few Slytherin players go down. Today's 20,000 word update is complete, and tomorrow the little author can only try his best to write more. Thank you for your perseverance. I have noticed the problem of emotional drama and will avoid it in the future. Thank you also for the comments of the big guys. The little author has not deleted a comment, and sometimes the system will automatically swallow the comment. I beg your understanding. Episode 82. Gaunt. Come with me. At this time, Alvin, who was eating in the auditorium, was directly pulled away by Professor McGonagall and went to her office. In the office, Snape and Harry were there, and Snape was facing the hamster and constantly trying to undo the spell. "Mr. Gaunt, please explain why you broke Flint's ribs 5 times and cast such a nasty transfiguration curse on Malfoy." Professor McGonagall looked serious and sat in her place, staring at Alvin tightly. She was actually very angry. She did not expect such a bad incident on the Quidditch pitch. Marcus Flint fractured his ribs, and now he is still in a coma in the school hospital. And Malfoy was even worse, still shivering on the table, and seeing Alvin come in, the hamster that Malfoy had transformed into was even more tearful. It's just that Professor McGonagall has known Alvin very well this year, and knows that he is not the kind of character who bullies others with talent, so she still suppresses her anger and wants to hear Alvin's explanation. Harry on the side stared at Malfoy without blinking, feeling very happy. Snape sensed Harry's pleasure and glanced at him coldly. Harry quickly lifted his face and tried to become expressionless. Snape didn't bother with this stupid Potter, but looked at Alvin with an unkind expression. "Gaunt, do you think defeating our Slytherin house students will show off your talent?" Alvin glanced at Harry in surprise and said in wonder, "Didn't you tell them?" "Say what?" Scratching his head, Harry asked confusedly. "What a thing on the Quidditch pitch." "I said it." "What about the mud-blood?" "Well, I didn't say that." Listening to the conversation between the two, Professor McGonagall and Snape's faces suddenly changed, especially Snape, whose expressions were hideous like a beast after hearing the word mudblood. "What do you mean, Gaunt? What a mudblood?" Listening to Snape's suffocating tone, Alvin still looked as usual, telling Malfoy and Marcus the exact words on the playground. Now even Professor McGonagall couldn't stand it, screamed, "Oh my god! How could they do this to Granger? 50 points deducted from Slytherin. No, 100 points. To Harry's surprise, Snape did not dispute Professor McGonagall's sentence, but instead stared coldly at Malfoy on the table. Alvin had long expected this result, and it was not surprising, got up and said. The two professors also understood the matter. "If there is nothing to do, I will go out first." After saying that, he looked like he was leaving. Professor McGonagall stopped Alvin. "Gaunt, your transfiguration is very profound. I won't be able to unravel it for a while. Can you restore Malfoy to his original state first? Undo the curse?" "No need," Snape spoke coldly and said in a stiff tone. "According to my judgment, Malfoy will recover tomorrow, so let him stay as he is. He should pay for his words." Professor McGonagall saw that Slytherin's own head of mind had said this, and she did not object. After all, she also hated Malfoy very much in her heart. Seeing that there was nothing to do with himself, Alvin pulled Harry out. Until he walked out of the office, Harry couldn't believe that Snape actually let Alvin go like this, and he looked at Alvin with some confusion. "That's it?" Looking at Harry looking stupid, Alvin shook his head helplessly. Was this kid PUA by Snape? Not happy without a meal? Alvin returned to his bedroom and lay on the bed, thinking carefully about what he was going to give Hermione and them a makeup lesson tomorrow. Although Cho and Hermione have mastered a lot of spells, they can only release them rigidly, and they have a poor grasp of time and accuracy. Alvin plans to get some moving targets tomorrow for them to practice. As for Harry, he is not as studious as Hermione. After a summer vacation, he must have forgotten a lot of the spells he learned last semester, and Harry's combat talent is not weak. He is only the foundation. After customizing tomorrow's plan, Alvin checked today's check-in reward. Wolf poison elixir purple. He thought about it, as if this potion had not yet been developed, author's private design, and he was going to publish this potion to see if he could get a medal of Sir Merlin to improve his reputation in the wizarding world. Reached out and snapped his fingers. A house elf appeared in front of him in an instant. Mr. Gaunt, Bar is happy to serve you. The elf Bar said respectfully to Alvin. This is the house elf in the manor that Nico Flamel gave him, and Alvin rarely visits that manor. He usually lives with Arya. Help me prepare a few herbs on this paper. Alvin handed Bar a list and casually ordered. Bar took the list excitedly, very excited. Alvin hasn't done anything since he took over his contract, much to Bar's frustration that his new owner doesn't like him. But today Alvin suddenly called him over and gave him a task, which made him happy again. With a respectful bow, Bar disappeared here in a phantom shapeshift. Alvin watched Bar come and go so easily, and he was also a little emotional. Hogwarts has a powerful magical enchantment that prohibits all wizards from apparaling or transfiguring into this area. Even he and Dumbledore could only rely on the Phoenix's special abilities to achieve phantom transfiguration. House elves are not within this limit. 14. It can only be said that each magical creature has its own special place. As long as it is used well, there will always be unexpected receipts. It didn't take long for Bar to return with the materials Alvin needed. Alvin opened the suitcase, entered the interior, and came to the laboratory in the cottage. The materials required for the refining of wolf poison potions are not expensive, but the control of fire is indeed very strict. Ancient flowers, fig peels, dead grass stained with wolf blood, rat tails. Following the steps of the recipe, Alvin operated step by step. After trying it a few times, I mastered the prescription proficiently. Alvin looked at the potion in his hand, touched his chin and thought about how to maximize the benefits of this potion. Episode 83, Alvin's Ambition. The small class has opened. In the wizarding world, the existence of werewolves wizards is jealous of most wizards, and is discriminated against and disgusted. A big part of the reason for this is that they go crazy on a full moon night. If a wizard who is scratched and bitten by a werewolf is not treated immediately, he will be infected and will most likely become a member of the werewolf. Therefore, in order to avoid risks, wizards are in a state of expulsion and distance from werewolf wizards. Remus Lupin in the original book is a typical example. Because he is a werewolf, he can't get a job at all, and he lived a poor life before coming to Hogwarts as a professor. Now that Alvin has mastered the wolf poison potion, he can use this as an opportunity to master some mental abilities, but he has become a werewolf wizard due to various accidents. Alvin gives them the chance to live in the sun again, and Alvin gains their allegiance. Secondly, Alvin can also gain great prestige through the werewolf potion, giving him a place in the wizarding world. It's a win-win, and Alvin won twice. Alvin has never been the kind of person who is indifferent to fame and fortune, although it cannot be said that he is ambitious. But he also wants to stand at the apex of the 17th world and respond to everything. To relive a lifetime, Alvin must not only have enough strength, but also want to obtain the prestige and material conditions that match it. Winning the Order of Sir Merlin, integrating the overturned alley, and eventually becoming a pivotal figure in the wizarding world is Alvin's plan. Alvin finished sorting his thoughts, put the werewolf potion into the locker first, prepared to go to Snape tomorrow to see what he could do, and then walked out of the suitcase. After looking at the sky, the time had come to the evening, and Alvin did not plan to go to dinner, and after reading a book for a while, he fell asleep. The next day, morning, Alvin woke up early and called Autumn to go to the Gryffindor common room to find Hermione and Harry. However, to his surprise, it was not only Harry Hermione who walked out of the portrait of the fat lady, but also Fred and George. "Why are you guys here to join in the fun?" The twins looked at Alvin with a grin, and Fred said, "Your previous rebound spell on the Quidditch court was so handsome. Just when I heard Harry say that you want to tutor them, we followed." Saying that, he also put his arm around Harry's shoulder, and Harry shrugged helplessly and looked at Alvin apologetically. Alvin waved his hand at Harry, indicating that he didn't care. Anyway, a sheep is also herded, and a flock of sheep is also herded. The twins can also be regarded as his employees, and they cultivate their fighting skills a lot, so as not to be killed by the Death Eaters in the later stage. Several people came to the 8th floor, and Alvin walked back and forth 3 times in front of the door of the Room of Demand, and between words, everyone was still wondering why Alvin brought them to the 8th floor. Knowing that this floor was the floor where the principal's office was located, I saw a smooth door suddenly appear on that wall, and Alvin walked in first. In a huge room, there are many targets, as well as dummies, and the walls are also made of steel. Cho never knew there was such a magical place at Hogwarts, and asked Alvin curiously, "How did you find this place?" "This is simply the perfect place to practice spells," Alvin answered Cho while waving his wand and dividing the space into several areas. "This room is called the Room of Demand. Go around the door 3 times just now, and then think to yourself, what do you need this place for? And he will try to meet your needs." After hearing this, everyone suddenly realized that this is not only a training room, but also a wishing house with a snap of his fingers and grabbing everyone's attention. Alvin spoke. Each of you has a different level of spells, so there will be no unified training. Harry, among all of them, you have the least spells. All you have to do now is to familiarize yourself with the Elementary Dark Arts Self-Defense Guide, and master a series of primary spells such as the Coma Charm. Don't be lazy. I'll check your progress in a moment. After speaking, Alvin pointed to a table in the corner and a small chair, signaling Harry to obediently go to read. Harry didn't expect to read a book when he came here, and he was a little depressed, but he sat down honestly under the pressure of Alvin's gaze. Cho and Hermione, you can use a lot of spells, but the application is too rigid and cannot effectively hit the enemy, so the main thing you practice today is the accuracy of the spells. I'm going to cast spells on these bludgers, and all you have to do today is hit them with spells as hard as you can. Alvin pointed out Cho and Hermione's shortcomings, and drew a small area for them where 3 bludgers were flying irregularly. Hermione and Cho nodded obediently and walked to the area, practicing according to Alvin's methods. As for you two, Alvin looked at the twins, touching his chin a little difficult. He really didn't think of anything to arrange for them. What do you want to learn? Alvin thought for a long time and didn't think of a suitable one, so he had to ask the twins. The hand of your 067 rebound spell. The twins spoke in unison. Alvin shook his head and explained, it's not a specific spell, but I know the spell they released at that time, so I easily bounced back. It's hard for you to do this, and the bells and whistles are useless. When Fred and George heard this, they had to give up, and then asked tentatively, are there any spells suitable for pranks? Alvin thought about it. He really agreed with their conditions, pointed his finger at the dummy next to him, and said softly in his mouth, upside down Admiralty. The dummy immediately floated into the air, with its head down and its legs on top. The twins looked pleased. This spell is good. It is definitely suitable for them. George and Fred nodded repeatedly, indicating that they learned this. Alvin took out a piece of parchment, wrote the spell and casting techniques, and handed it to the two. After Fred and George got the spell, they happily ran to the side and studied the spell. Seeing that everyone has their own tasks, there is no need for Alvin's tutoring in a short time. He conjured up a table, a chaise longue, and then a magic wand, and a pot of black tea appeared on the table, along with a few beef sandwiches. Maisie sat down on the deck chair and enjoyed the good time. Episode 84, I am willing to contribute to the peace of the wizarding world. Alvin and they spent the whole day in the room of demand. Even for lunch, the elves were sent here. Because of their age, Autumn and Hermione's magic powers are not enough, and every dozen spells are released. They need to rest for a while, but neither of the little witches felt tired. After all, they had never cast spells like this. Speaking of this, Alvin had to complain that there was really a big problem with Hogwarts education. The school forbade spells in the corridors, and the main purpose of the classroom was to teach spells. And after returning home during the summer vacation, the young wizards are not allowed to use magic outside the school, so it is difficult for Hogwarts students to have the opportunity to contact magic. It's the same as Muggle students learning something in class, but the teacher doesn't allow them to do extracurricular exercises at all. No wonder the Hogwarts students got worse from one class to the next, and Harry even used a disarming charm to the finale. Alright. Let's stop here today. Alvin counted the time, found that it was time for dinner, and stopped everyone. Harry let out a long sigh of relief. He had been reading the Elementary Defense Against the Dark Arts Guide from morning to now, and as soon as he wandered, Alvin's spell flew over. Although it is not an offensive spell, it can make him itch all over, which is simply real damage. But the day is still fruitful. This time at the beginning of school, he has forgotten several spells learned in the last semester. Today I read a day's book. I also recalled a lot, and learned the coma spell. Fred and George were also very happy. Their talent was really good. They were already proficient in using the upside-down golden bell, and at this time the two were muttering about who to let experience the spell. After the group went out in a mighty manner, they walked towards the Great Hall, but Harry was halfway there, and he patted his head and said in chagrin, I forgot, I'm going to help Lockhart reply to fans tonight. This is Professor McGonagall's punishment for driving Harry and Ron to school. Ron is going to wipe the trophy, and Harry is going to help Lockhart reply to the fans. But Harry would rather switch with Ron than be alone with Lockhart. Alvin thought for a moment. He should also go talk to Snape about the wolf poison potion, so he said to Cho and Hermione, I have something to do with Snape. You go to the Great Hall. The two women nodded, and then separated from Alvin. Alvin also went to Snape's office. Snape didn't like to eat in the Great Hall very much. He liked to be quietly alone in the office, especially after Alvin gave him the Realm of Eden. Snape went to the Great Hall less and less. After knocking on the door and getting a response from Snape, Alvin pushed the door open and walked closer. Snape's office was still so cold and damp, but to Alvin's surprise, Malfoy was here. When Malfoy saw that the person who came in was Alvin, his little face was suddenly bloodless, and he immediately stood up from his chair and hid behind Professor Snape with his legs swinging. Alvin didn't care when he saw Malfoy's PTSD look, and greeted him with a smile. Yo, Malfoy, are you here to file a complaint with Professor Snape? Nope. No. The professor punished me for copying the potions textbook today. I didn't come to make a small report. Malfoy was afraid that Alvin would misunderstand him, and immediately said why. He didn't want to become a hamster at once, and this whole day's experience would follow him like a nightmare for the rest of his life. Alvin didn't expect Snape to be so ruthless. and when the transformation was over, he directly let Malfoy stay here and copy the textbook. "What's the matter with you coming here, Finta?" Snape ignored the conversation between the two and asked Alvin. Alvin shook the bottle in his hand and replied, "There is a major event that is conducive to peace in the wizarding world, and I want to talk to you about it." After speaking, his eyes also looked at Malfoy deliberately. Snape frowned, a little unsure what kind of moth Alvin wanted to make, but he began to say to Malfoy, "Malfoy, you go first. I hope you will remember later what to say and what not to say." Malfoy nodded his little head quickly, indicating that he understood and was about to flee this terrible office. But when he was about to walk out of this office, he was stopped by Alvin. "Wait a minute, Malfoy." Malfoy also stopped when he heard Alvin's words and looked at Alvin uneasily. "I don't think the glory of pure blood can be highlighted by a few vicious words." Malfoy was stunned, not expecting Alvin to say this to him. "I'm not pure blood, but do you dare to offend me?" Alvin continued, "You don't dare, because you know my strength, weakness or ignorance are not obstacles to survival, arrogance is." Malfoy lowered his head and clenched his fists. He looked up slightly and opened his mouth to say something, but he didn't say it. Alvin waved his hand, signaling that he could leave. Alvin was just a whim today, after all, although Malfoy looked bad and pus now. It also had something to do with the bad circumstances of his childhood life. He didn't expect his words to change Malfoy's mind, he just planted a seed later. When Malfoy left the office, Alvin behaved much more naturally, and without waiting for Snape to greet, he found a couch to sit on. At the same time, he used his magic power to deliver the potion and the parchment of the refining method to Snape's desk. Malfoy returned to the Slytherin dormitory and immediately lay on the bed. A day's running and subsequent confinement had exhausted him, and he had long wanted to get a good night's sleep. But when he closed his eyes, Malfoy couldn't sleep, thinking about Alvin's words just now, "What is the glory of pure blood?" He said he didn't understand. From an early age, his father taught him that he was pure-blooded and naturally superior. But when he came to the school, he found that not only Alvin, but even Hermione, he couldn't compare. There are also reasons for his jealousy when he speaks harshly to each other on the playground. Today's words from Alvin completely broke the worldview imposed on him by his father and made him think on his own initiative. For the first time he wants to be like Alvin, with a mixed race, step by step, relying on his own strength, to become the leader of the entire school. Even the Slytherin Blood First house has quite a few of his followers. Thinking of this, Malfoy's confused eyes gradually condensed, became firm, and secretly made a decision in his heart at this time. Alvin didn't know about Malfoy's change of mentality. He was staring at Snape. "Alvin, theta theta, Snape, equals. Finally, Snape couldn't help himself and asked, "Why are you developing a wolf poison potion? Most of the werewolves in the wizarding world are poor, and they don't make much profit for you." Snape is very upset with Alvin. "Don't you know that your teacher's sworn enemy has a werewolf?" Alvin ignored Snape's dissatisfaction and said with a sincere expression, "I'm not trying to make money, but I can't bear to see these werewolf wizards being discriminated against, and other wizards are also worried about being hurt. For the prosperity of the wizarding world, I issued the wolf poison potion so that the werewolf wizard can return to the wizarding world." Snape watched Alvin's passionate speech quietly, unmoved. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "Speak human words, Gaunt." Snape knew Alvin too well. He was a man who couldn't afford to be early, and he wouldn't believe Alvin's nonsense for the sake of the wizarding world. "Well, I want to get a medal of Sir Merlin." Alvin spread his hands and said his true purpose. "Are you serious?" Snape looked at Alvin, a little surprised by his purpose. It is a fantasy for the underage little wizard to receive the order of Sir Merlin, not to mention Alvin, even he himself does not have one now. Of course, it could also have something to do with his Death Eater experience, or with his level of potions. He would have been able to get one by publishing a few random papers. "Of course, my professor, you are a well-known potions master in the wizarding world, and if you help me operate it with your connections, you should get one, right?" Snape thought for a moment, as if it really could. The current Minister of Magic, Fudge, a politician through and through. If only the problem of werewolves could be solved in his tenure, plus some of Snape's old friends. Rewarding Alvin with a medal of Sir Merlin is really not a big problem. After thinking it through, he turned his gaze to Alvin's. "Are you sure you want to publish this recipe for free, just for a false honorary order of Sir Merlin?" Alvin nodded, expressing his determination. "Well, I'll try, but don't get your hopes up. After all, it's never been like giving a Merlin medal to a second grader." But in 1827 they awarded Shane Levins one, and he was only in the first grade. Alvin retorted that he had read some of the history of Merlin's medals, because he died protecting 10 muggles. Snape sharply sneered at Alvin. "Alvin, well, he did forget this paragraph." Episode 85, Parseltongue, Pig's Head Lollipop. Monday, Charms class. Harry sat nervously next to Alvin and pushed Hermione aside, looking at Harry strangely. Alvin was a little strange. "What's wrong, Harry? Why do you have this expression? What would you think if I said I could hear something that no one else could hear?" Harry leaned into Alvin's ear and whispered, very much like a secret agent. Alvin subconsciously stepped back. He didn't want to be so close to the boy. But after listening to Harry's words, his heart moved. Could it be that Harry had already encountered the basilisk? "Can you describe it to me?" Alvin asked with interest. Harry briefly explained what had happened yesterday. When he replied to Lockhart's office after listening, Alvin confirmed that it was the basilisk. But he didn't say it directly. Alvin had his own plan. Even if he didn't usually care, He still had the blood of the Gaunt family flowing in his blood, and he wanted to try if it was possible to subdue the basilisk. Alvin believes that the Slytherin legacy is definitely more than this basilisk, and it would be best if some of the Slytherin secrets could be discovered through the basilisk. Probably one of your talents, Harry. Watching Professor Flitwick walk away, Alvin said to 880 Harry, "You know, there is always something special about wizards, so it's no surprise that you awaken some talents." Harry listened to Alvin's flickering analysis, and also relaxed. When he talked to Ron yesterday, Ron didn't believe his words at all, which made him very frustrated. "I'm sure you're fooling Harry." While Harry was practicing spells, Hermione suddenly leaned into Alvin's ear and said, she now knows Alvin very well, and once he says something in a serious way, it is often his performance of fooling people. "No, not this time, Harry does have a special talent." Alvin patted Hermione's head angrily, a little dissatisfied with her not believing herself. "What talent?" Hermione covered her head and looked at Alvin curiously. She hadn't found anything special about Harry in the past year. "You'll find out next week." Alvin sold a pass, and Hermione gave him an angry look, turned and walked back to practice the disappearing spell with Patil in the evening. Alvin expertly sneaks into the forbidden book area, looking for any books about Parseltongue. With his bloodline, it should not be difficult to learn the snake-old language. He secretly tried to turn the teapot into a snake with transfiguration himself, and then tried to talk to it, but unfortunately Alvin failed, and the snake had turned into a snake soup. He thought that Harry could talk to the snake because of that scar, and Voldemort had left some legacy in Harry's forehead after all. Last semester, Alvin also often came to the library at night to read books, but generally some books about ancient magic patterns and alchemy. He did not pay much attention to such anecdotes in the wizarding world. The library at Hogwarts is the largest in all of Britain, if not the world. Among them, the forbidden book area accounts for at least 1/3, and it is impossible for Alvin to read so many books in a year. He can only find it according to his own needs. Unfortunately, this time he searched through a lot of areas, but did not find a book like this. The most is to introduce some wizards with Parseltongue talents. The specific language is not mentioned at all, but Alvin was in no hurry. He could try to learn the language from Harry. Putting all the books back in place, Alvin left. The time soon came to Sunday, and several people arrived at the room of requirement again to prepare for this week's magic practice. But before starting training, Fred and George pulled Alvin aside. He took out the box like a treasure. "Lollipop?" Alvin opened the box and looked at it, didn't find anything special. "Just try it," Fred said mysteriously, and George next to him also looked expectant. The corner of Alvin's eyes jumped. "Really, when we met on the first day, do I dare to eat the food handed over by the two of you?" Pretending to pick up two Alvin of different colors, green is apple flavored, pink is strawberry flavored, and takes them apart, pretending to think about which one he wants to eat. Suddenly, Alvin quickly shoved two lollipops into the twins' zoo. The two were snickering and didn't react at all. "Oh." Fred and George subconsciously tasted the lollipop. "Well, it's good, it's sweet." Bang. After the sound, two pig heads appeared on their necks. Poof. Autumn saw two huge pig heads, instantly sprayed tea on the ground, and then laughed and trembled. Hermione and Harry were also happy. They always watched Fred and George tease others, but they didn't expect that they would also be killed back. Fred and George looked at each other, and they couldn't help but laugh, but they couldn't help but hold such a big pig's head, and even the laughter was hum. 5 minutes later, they resumed the prototype. Fred said, although it did not go according to plan. George followed, "But our pig's head lollipop works well." Looking at the way they sang and harmonized, everyone laughed again. Gemini is like this, always brings joy to people, and their products have caught the attention of others. Everyone paid for some to use for pranks. Even a good girl like Hermione bought two. The twins also laughed and couldn't close their mouths. It seems that this pig's head lollipop will become a hit. After a few small talks, everyone is ready to start today's lesson. Alvin took out a few bottles of potions and distributed them to everyone. "These are all potions, and after drinking them, your magic power will grow rapidly." Several people looked at the potions in their palms with burning eyes, especially Fred and George. They, wizards living in pure blood families, knew better how precious potions were. There was a struggle in their expressions, but the two of them spread their hands in unison to return the potion to Alvin. "Alvin, this is so precious, you just sell us, and can't afford a bottle." The twins said it funny, but others also heard the value of the bottle. They all looked at Alvin. Alvin smiled. He admired the twins' hearts, but since he gave it to them, he had no intention of taking it back. "Don't worry, these are all refined by me. I still have a lot of inventory. I have already drunk a bottle. You can use these." Listening to Alvin's words, the twins were relieved and looked at each other, both proud to have made a friend like Alvin. Hermione and Cho didn't have so many thoughts. They were all Alvin's, and a bottle of potions was nothing. As for Harry, he is even more humble. He thinks that Alvin has helped him enough. There are more lice, and more debts are not worrying as long as Alvin needed him. He did it. If Alvin heard Harry's heart, he would definitely sigh with emotion. Fools have foolish fortunes. Episode 86, Dedicate yourself to the greater good. Harry. "Harry, I have some guesses about that voice you heard last time." After Alvin and the others drank the potion, he said to Harry. Harry was also intrigued to hear Alvin say this. It's been a week since he last had been in Lockhart's office, and he hasn't heard that voice again. so much so that he himself thought it was an illusion. As a result, today Alvin said that he had some conjectures, and he was eager to hear Alvin's opinion. I think it might be an animal voice, and some wizards can understand the language of some magical creatures. Alvin pretended to analyze. So let's test it today to see if it's what I suspected. Harry didn't know how Alvin was going to test, so he could only nod subconsciously. The others also looked at Alvin curiously. Alvin took out his wand and tapped the chair behind him. The chair quickly turned into a rat and squeaked at Harry. Can you understand what he's saying? Alvin asked Harry. Harry shook his head blankly. Later, Alvin turned the chair into a bat, a unicorn lizard, and a toad. One by one, Harry tried to understand their calls but failed. Alvin saw that the foreshadowing was almost done, so he stopped hiding it and turned the chair into a python. Ah! Two screams came to mind, and Hermione and Cho were taken aback, looked at the python in fear, and stood far away. The python swallowed the snake letter, and a pair of vertical eyes stared at Harry, making a hissing sound. Harry is also a little panicked now. He now thinks that Alvin is trying to prank him. He said sadly, Alvin has any comments to mention, I can change. Don't scare me with such a big python. Alvin saw that Harry was too scared to move, and he thought he should give him another hard blow. Controlling the python to snake towards Harry, the front half of the python was still upright. Don't you come over. Harry screamed in horror, but he made a completely non-human voice. It was a creepy hoarseness, full of gloomy and cruel meaning, and the giant python obediently stopped, and did not continue to advance towards Harry. Harry finally breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't know that his words ordered the python, and thought that Alvin was manipulating it, but soon he saw the rest of the people looking at him in amazement, with incredulous expressions. Harry, you're still a snake, old man, you've never told us, Fred said in amazement. What am I? Harry asked. Parseltongue. George answered. You can talk to snakes. Salazar Slytherin is a parseltongue. Harry was confused, but he remembered that when he went to the zoo as a child, he also released the Brazilian python, and the Brazilian python told him that it had never been to Brazil. Alvin interrupted Harry's memories with a loud voice. Looks like the horse sound you heard that day was snake-like, Harry. Alvin had also heard what Harry said to the snake just now. Probably because of the bloodline, he could understand what Harry said, but just one sentence was not enough. He needed more words to communicate with the basilisk in the future. Smiling at Harry, although Alvin was very amiable like this, Harry couldn't stop shivering, as if something bad was about to happen. Harry, I'm very interested in this kind of parseltongue. Can you teach me? But I don't know how to teach people, I just do it subconsciously, Harry said with some difficulty. He didn't even know that he had just spoken the language of the snake. It's okay, I have some special methods. Alvin didn't care at all, and said with a spring breeze on his face, next. Alvin, help. The twins and the two women looked at Harry, who kept screaming in amazement, and at this time he had been tightly wrapped around the giant python conjured by Alvin. Harry, don't talk to me, you should talk to the snake, say something different, don't repeat a sentence all the time. This is Alvin's special trick, directly tie Harry into rice dumplings, and then let Harry continue to communicate with the python. He can take the opportunity to learn a few more words. Harry, who was entangled, could only obey Alvin's request and intermittently say some words, trying to communicate with the python. Harry's snot and tears shocked the others a lot, and they all made up their minds that they must not provoke Alvin in the future. This person's operation is too riotous. Especially Fred and George. Just now they were still thinking about how they could successfully play a prank on Alvin's head, but now it seems that forget it, the big guy can't afford to provoke. He can't afford to provoke. For an entire hour, Harry was in that state of utter collapse. In the end, it was Alvin who saw that he had really been repeating a few words back and forth, and there were no new words, before releasing him. Alvin, spare me. Harry, who was released by the python, walked to Alvin's side and pleaded with pain on his face. At this time, Harry's clothes were full of mucus and a fishy smell. Covering his nose and casting a new spell, Alvin restored Harry's clothes to their original state, removing the stench, and then spoke seriously. It's all for the greater good, Harry. Be prepared to dedicate yourself to magic. Harry looked at Alvin with disgust. This is a dedication to magic, but why am I dedicating my life to your magic? But Harry didn't dare to say it. Alvin's means of tossing people he also appreciated. If the words of spit were remembered by Alvin, then he would have no place to cry then. Alvin knew that Harry couldn't agree to his request today, and besides, he also had a lot of snake vocabulary, and he needed to digest it well. In the following time, Alvin also started normal teaching, and in order to compensate Harry, he also taught him the spell of hanging the golden bell upside down. Does this make Harry feel a lot better? Episode 87, Alvin, so my life is so hard? Time flew by, and in the blink of an eye it was October. Hogwarts has also been open for more than a month. Unlike the first year, the second year had a lot heavier schoolwork than the first year, and every day Harry and Ron had to beg Alvin to give them their homework a reference. Alvin didn't care, but every time Hermione's eyes made Harry and Ron feel like they were guilty, as if borrowing homework was a sinful thing. On this day, when Alvin came to the auditorium for breakfast as usual, he found that many young wizards were looking at him with adoration. This made Alvin a little puzzled. Although he was already famous in school, it had never been like today, when those little wizards wanted to eat him. What's wrong with this? he asked Cho in a low voice. I don't know. Aki was also very puzzled. At this time, Colin suddenly ran over and shouted to Alvin excitedly, Fantastic! Alvin, can I take a picture of you? I never knew you were so kind. Alvin said hello with a face. What is this kid sick again? Colin, what's going on? Can you tell me what happened? Resisting the urge to throw this little devil's head away, Alvin asked softly, Don't you know? You're on the Daily Prophet. It turns out that Alvin, you have such a great ideal. Oh, you are really too gentle. In the end, Colin actually choked up. The corners of Alvin's mouth twitched, and Colin didn't say anything for a long time, but he also keenly captured the key information. The Daily Prophet quickly asked Cho to bring a newspaper, and Alvin flipped through it. Sure enough, on the second page, a huge headline occupies a bright position. The genius wizard Alvin studies wolf poison potions for the peace of the wizarding world. Alvin did not expect that the matter of wolf poison would actually be in the newspaper. It is estimated that Snape made it in order to create momentum for him, and Alvin didn't care. And then read on, Alvin Gaunt, a freshman who has just been in the second year this year. He has outstanding talent and handsome appearance, but what touches him the most is indeed his dream. An entire page is full of introductions to Alvin and wolf venom. However, what makes Alvin speechless is that the article points out that although Alvin came from an orphanage in the Muggle world, he has always maintained a kind heart. The newspaper also made up several touching short stories, describing the difficulty of his life, the hard work of studying, not only willing to help classmates and seeing the plight of the werewolf wizard, you could not bear it, but also specially developed a wolf poison potion, and disclosed the formula free of charge after reading it. Alvin was moved by himself in the newspaper, and he didn't know that his life was so difficult. Cho on the side also finished reading the newspaper and stared at Alvin with a strange face. How much money exactly did you stuff the Daily Prophet? Can you let them talk for you like this? Patting Cho's little head, Alvin said angrily, I didn't give a gold galleon. I don't know why they wrote this. Maybe I am such an image in everyone's mind. Cho straightened her hair that had been messed up by Alvin. She had nothing to say about Alvin's narcissism. Soon, all the little wizards knew the contents of the newspaper, and some emotional little witches quietly wiped their tears when they saw the stories made up above. There are even some little witches who want to give Alvin a loving hug if it wasn't for Cho stopping. Alvin had to bear these same gazes, and then quickly finished breakfast with Cho, ready to go to Snape instead. He wanted to ask Snape why he was so commotionful. In Snape's office, Alvin and Snape sat opposite each other. Shaking the newspaper in his hand, Alvin was a little helpless. Professor, this newspaper is too outrageous, right? They wouldn't have written these stories if they investigated casually. Listening to Alvin's complaints, Snape was also helpless. He just asked a few old friends to help Alvin build momentum, and it just so happened that one of his friends was the editor-in-chief of the Daily Prophet, so he mentioned it. I didn't expect such a big news. However, he would not admit his mistake to Alvin, so he could only speak bluntly. This is to better arouse the sympathy of the public, but also to better impress Fudge. He will not miss such an opportunity to win the hearts of the people. Your Merlin medal is stable, but I don't know how many levels it is. Hearing Snape's explanation, Alvin also had to admit that what he said made some sense, and that it had happened, and he could only acquiesce. The following day, owls kept sending letters to Alvin, some thanking him for his contributions to the werewolf wizard, and some condolences to his difficult life. Many people also sent him condolences. Just sorting through the letters and packages took Alvin an afternoon, and in order to maintain his personality, he also replied to these letters one by one, especially those letters from werewolf wizards, and Alvin specifically explained that there was a shop in Overturned Alley that had begun to sell wolf poison potions. As early as last month, Alvin sent a batch of wolf poison potions to Overturning Alley, allowing Alia to sell them at her discretion, and if she didn't have the money to buy it, she didn't have to worry, she could postpone the payment. This is a means to recruit werewolf wizards. In fact, most of the werewolf wizards have good combat effectiveness, and their reflexes and physical fitness are far higher than ordinary wizards. With a little training, learning a few powerful spells is definitely a backbone. Alvin cast a spell on the quill pen, and several quill pens began to automatically write the contents of the reply, greatly reducing his workload. And finally 41, before dinner, Alvin completed all the work. Those condolences were returned by Alvin, and he was not a wizard who really had a difficult life, and these things could not be taken. Sure enough, at dinner, Dumbledore announced that this Saturday, Fudge would come over to award Alvin the Order of Merlin of the 3rd class in recognition of his contributions. This made Lockhart's face a little ugly. He did not expect that this little wizard who always had some trouble with him had won the same honor as him in a blink of an eye. A big guy in the comments section pointed out one of my mistakes. The gift to the twins at Christmas was not an upside-down admiralty, but the spell that James Potter used to knock Snape's pants off when he was a student. Thank you for watching so carefully. Little brother is very honored. Episode 88, Old Man of the Wizarding World. Saturday morning, the sun was shining. At this time it has entered October, and although the weather is a little cool, the greenery has not completely receded. On the lawn in front of Hogwarts Castle, a stocky middle-aged man, dressed in a muggle suit, waited quietly. Behind him there were several wizards, who were arranging some tables and chairs, and in the center, a high platform stood up. A wizard came over, lowered his head slightly, and said to the man in a suit, "Minister, It seems that the members of the jury will not come over for a while, otherwise you will wait in the castle first? This man in a suit is none other than the Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge. Don't bother, Shackle. I have to make sure they can see me in the first place. You know that these old men of the jury will be very troublesome if they say a few words about me, Fudge said to the aura named Shackle. The jury that can make Fudge so jealous is, of course, the review members of the Knights of the May 17th Lin, and those old men all have a high reputation in the wizarding world. Although they usually live in seclusion and do not ask about the world, no one will underestimate their influence. Fudge's purpose in coming so early today was also to make some good impressions on these people, and some people in the outside world always said that he was a puppet supported by Dumbledore. He also hoped to get more support from Dumbledore to get rid of the shadow that Dumbledore had given him soon. An old man appeared from the other end of the suspension bridge and walked over slowly. Fudge hurriedly greeted him, wiped the fine sweat that had appeared from leaving quickly, and said attentively, "Mr. Bohan, I didn't expect you to come so early." Seeing Fudge so attentive, the old man was a little impatient, and casually said a few perfunctory words. "I came to see the boy who had researched the wolf poison potion, and Nicole praised him in his letter. You're busy with yours." After speaking, regardless of the somewhat embarrassed Fudge, he walked straight into the campus. Then some people came one after another, some old people came alone, and some also brought a few junior young wizards, but they didn't like to deal with politicians like Fudge very much, and casually exchanged a few words, and they didn't care. Fudge was also secretly wondering in his heart what kind of magic this Alvin Gaunt had that could make so many big people come out of the mountain to award him medals. "Alvin, a lot of people are coming." Headmaster Dumbledore had already gone out to receive. Hermione chirped and reported to Alvin about the situation outside. Since learning the news that Alvin had received the Merlin medal, the little witch was even more excited than Alvin herself, constantly telling what she knew. "I didn't know that Hermione was going to receive the Merlin medal." Alvin saw Hermione and Cho so excited, and it was not good to be discouraged, so he could only go outside the castle at the urging of the two women at this time. The outside of the castle had been neatly arranged. Dumbledore was chatting with a group of old men, and there were many young wizards watching there in the distance, but they did not dare to get too close. Dumbledore saw Alvin's appearance and waved at him, signaling him to come over. Dumbledore happily introduced him to these people, and many of their names often appeared in Alvin's textbooks. Alvin also greeted politely. A group of old men looked at Alvin with a smile, and the old man named Bohan suddenly asked, "Can you tell us about your idea for developing wolf poison potion? The skin of the fig has a calming effect, and the tail of the mouse can control the bloodthirsty impulse, and..." Alvin talked eloquently, talking about the principle of this potion. He understood the minds of this group of people. A second-year young wizard developed such a powerful potion is indeed a bit of a fantasy. With Alvin's explanation, everyone also fell into silent thinking, and from time to time some people asked some difficult points during refining. Dumbledore watched with a smile, a little relieved, but he still had to go to entertain the officials of the Ministry of Magic, and he left in a few moments. And the topic of Alvin and a group of old men gradually turned from wolf poison potions to the whole of potions, and even some problems with spells. To everyone's amazement, although Alvin did not know much about some aspects, as long as he opened his mouth, he must have something to say, and he had his own unique opinions. Gradually, the crowd changed from asking Alvin questions to equal exchanges, which made some of the young wizards and Hogwarts students who were brought to the market stunned. "This person, is it so strong?" When Dumbledore came to call them to the award ceremony, the group of old men and Alvin stopped unfinished. One of them sighed, "I really want to talk to Alvin for a while, but today's purpose is not this. We can't delay your award ceremony. Yes, when Nico invited us here, he said that we would definitely praise you, and now it seems that he really didn't say anything big." Bohan also said in agreement. This old man called Bohan 407, Alvin had just understood. His ancestors were the pioneers of St. Mungo's magical hospital, and their family had been known for potions for more than 400 years. After listening to his words, Alvin knew that so many big people who came this time were invited by Nico Flamel, and a strong gratitude appeared in his heart. This old man is really good to him. Alvin only mentioned some of his ideas to Nico in the letter, but he did not expect to get such strong support from him. "Gaunt, I have to admit that you are very popular with old people." Dumbledore teased Alvin with a smile. Alvin felt a chill. How could it feel strange when these words came out of old Dang's mouth? In the next ceremony, Dumbledore, as the chief mage of the Wizengamot, wore the medal for Alvin. Alvin made some more speeches, saying that he would continue to work hard, and ended this ceremony. The little wizards were envious, especially Percy, who just wanted to have a few casual words with these big guys and didn't have a chance. But Alvin was able to talk and laugh with them. Sometimes, the gap between people and people is really bigger than the gap between people and dogs. Episode 89, Harry? No, Hallie. After the award shop ended, Alvin was pulled by a group of old men, which made Fudge, who wanted to come up and have a relationship with Alvin Lara, a little embarrassed, and Alvin was also happy to do so. Fudge, the standard politician face, can now smile at you, and when there is a conflict of interest, he will immediately turn his face. He only wanted to raise his reputation to the point that Fudge was jealous, lest he suffer when Fudge targeted Dumbledore in the future, but he didn't want to have anything to do with Fudge. Alvin followed a group of elderly people to chat late at night. For the sake of their health, he persuaded them to go back one by one, and exchanged contact information with Alvin before leaving, which was convenient for the exchange of letters. At the end of the day, Alvin faced everyone with a standard smile, which lasted until the evening, and he felt that his whole face was going to freeze. Rubbing his stiff cheeks, he dragged his tired body and walked back to the lounge. Bang! Alvin, who had just stepped into the lounge, was taken aback. I saw that the common room was densely packed with people. Even Harry and Ron of Gryffindor were here. Cho and Hermione were holding wizard fireworks in their hands, and they had made the noise just now. Congratulations, Alvin. As Cho's words fell, a thunderous applause erupted in the lounge. Almost all Ravenclaws didn't sleep. All are waiting for Alvin here. Fantastic. Order of Merlin 3rd class, you're so cool when you communicate with those people. I have only seen the names of many people in books. You broke the record for the youngest Ravenclaw to receive a Merlin medallion. The little wizards said one by one. The scene was a little chaotic, but everyone was celebrating Alvin's happiness, which made Alvin, who had been smiling all day, also show a sincere smile. This was followed by a small banquet in which the house elves prepared a sumptuous dinner specially for this moment. Autumn tricked out the butterbeer contributed by George and Fred and distributed it to everyone. A group of people sang and danced, venting their inner joy. This made the tired Alvin feel like he was in it. The banquet lasted until the second half of the night, when it ended hastily. Looking at the messy lounge, snapping his fingers, Alvin called Bar and asked him to help clean up the mess. He went back to the bedroom, and it didn't take long for him to fall asleep. And gradually approached Halloween, and Alvin's heat gradually subsided, which also made him breathe a sigh of relief. During this time, Alvin received all kinds of fan letters every day, and some love letters from the little witch of the school to Alvin, asking him if he would mind having an extra girlfriend. But unfortunately, these love letters were not destroyed by a fire curse from Miss Cho Zhang, and Alvin regretted it for a few minutes. Harry's life was not very good. Because of the Merlin medal, Dumbledore added another 200 points to Ravenclaw, and with Alvin's usual excellent performance, this semester's House Cup definitely still belongs to the Eagle House. Snape was also in a bad mood because of this, and every day in potions class, he had to find various reasons to deduct some of Harry's points. He just wanted me to die. Harry, who was unlovable, sat next to Alvin and complained to him. 1 point deducted from Gryffindor. Don't talk while the professor is lecturing, Potter. Snape keenly caught Harry's small move, followed by a critical blow. Harry didn't feel it anymore. Alvin looked at Harry's numb look and also sighed. Who made you the son of James? However, he remembered that he hadn't signed in today, and habitually clicked on the panel and clicked the sign-in button. Get a daily check-in reward, Transfancy Potion, Denatured Potion, Purple, change the gender of the user in a short period of time without side effects. Alvin. Looking at the unclaimed Transfiguration Potion, Alvin looked at Harry again. This system is going to make trouble. Sensing that Alvin looked at him strangely, Harry cast a puzzled look. Alvin hesitated, but curiosity overcame his friendship with Harry. He asked quietly, would you like to try my method? Maybe Snape will be a little nicer to you. However, there may be some risks. Alvin also didn't know if Harry would become more like Lily after drinking this potion, and whether he would attack Snape. Harry's eyes flashed after hearing this, and such a good thing? But Alvin's reliability has always given him a lot of confidence. Nodding resolutely, Harry motioned for Alvin to let the horse go, silently took out the Sextigeneration potion and handed it to Harry, and Alvin gave him another piece of voice-changing gum that Fred had given him. Harry looked at the two things Alvin had given him, a little puzzled. Does that really make Snape friendly? After hesitating for a few seconds, Harry followed Alvin's instructions, drank the potion, and then ate the gum again. Snape noticed the movement and was just about to reprimand when he saw Harry's change. At this time, Harry's facial features gradually softened, and the Adam's apple disappeared, gradually turning into the appearance of a girl. Lily. Snape whispered this, forgetting for a moment what he was going to say. Harry, who was watched by Snape, was also a little uncomfortable. He had never seen Snape look like this. All this time, Snape looked at him with a look of disgust, as if Harry Potter should never have existed in this world. But what did he see in Snape's eyes now? Tenderness, remembrance, remorse, and tears. Looking at Harry's dazed appearance, Snape's heart was fiercely touched, and he hurriedly came back to his senses and asked Harry to stand up. Harleen, repeat what I just did. Snape subconsciously changed Harry's name. Professor, are you calling me? Harry replied, as if Snape had mispronounced his name just now. But after speaking, Harry was taken aback by his own voice. How did he become a girl? But immediately he reacted, it must be the ghost of what Alvin just gave him. Glaring at Alvin fiercely, he found that everyone was looking at him with strange eyes, but he didn't have time to take care of that, and quickly answered Snape's question. I'm sorry, Professor, I didn't hear what you just said too clearly. Snape subconsciously wanted to deduct Gryffindor's points, but looked at those emerald green eyes looking at him, and it wasn't Jamie's nasty face. He struggled for a long time and finally said, listen carefully in class, and keep your eyes on the professor. But your honesty deserves praise. Gryffindor plus 10. Episode 90, Ron, what are you blushing? Harry couldn't believe that Snape had given him extra points, but he wouldn't be stupid enough to confirm it again, in case Snape came to his senses. Nodding, Harry took his seat. His eyes subconsciously looked at Alvin, and he wondered why Snape changed so much after his voice became a female voice. At this time, Harry did not know that he had become a girl. I just thought it was a problem with the sound. But Alvin no longer had the energy to answer Harry's doubts, and he was now sniffling and his expression was very distorted. Don't get me wrong. Alvin was holding back a smile. He didn't expect this play to be so exciting. Just now Snape's eyes that could be called a fan-shaped statistical chart and Harry's dazed look at this time, they all poked hard at his laughing point. Seeing Alvin like this, how could Harry not know that he was being fixed by him? But unfortunately it was now class otherwise. Even if he couldn't beat Alvin, Harry would rush to fight for him. For the next half of the potions lesson, everyone's 3 views collapsed 40, exactly 40. Snape kept asking Harry, and Harry couldn't answer. But Snape always found a reason to add points to him knowing that the bell rang at the end of class. Snape glanced at Harry reluctantly before leaving the classroom. No one slowed down. The Slytherin students felt like Harry had been drugged by Harry since 257 headmasters, and glared at Harry viciously, but the more I looked at it, the more I feminine Harry, it's also quite cute. Hiss. Can't think about it. They quickly withdrew their gaze, and fled out of the classroom. Ha 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 ha. Alvin finally couldn't hold back and laughed. Alvin. I fought with you. Harry couldn't help it. Even if he pranked him, he laughed so unscrupulously, it was really unbearable. Pushing away Harry, who was pounced, Alvin said breathlessly, Don't be like this. I'm afraid Cho and Hermione will misunderstand. Then Hermione also came over and looked at Harry with a strange face. I won't get me wrong, Alvin, and do you want to move to the girls' dormitory? Harry was even more confused, what the two were talking about. At this time Alvin conjured a mirror and handed it to Harry. Harry took the mirror, looked over, and then his eyes went dark. This beautiful girl in the mirror, duh. How did you become a girl in the mirror? You're kidding, aren't you, Alvin? Harry asked Alvin, a little more crying in his tone. At this time Alvin also laughed enough, panted slightly, and replied, Don't worry, Harry, this is only a temporary transformation, and it will recover soon. On the side, Hermione pinched Alvin. This time his joke was a little bigger, and directly changed Harry's gender, but Hermione glanced at Harry a few more times. Burst. Hermione couldn't help but laugh too. Harry's son left the two of them in no way, ready to follow Ron out of the classroom and back to the dormitory. He didn't want to hang out with a feminine face, but when he saw Ron's strange eyes staring at him and his flushed face, he suddenly panicked. Ron didn't expect that his good friend, after becoming a girl, was actually strangely good-looking, didn't know what he was thinking. His eyes were a little fluttering, and the blush on his cheeks spread to his ears. What the hell are you blushing? It took a whole day for Harry to return to his original form, and from then on, he had a shadow in his heart about any food Alvin gave him, but Alvin didn't have time to tease Harry anymore. Arya suddenly wrote that the wolf poison potion in the store was almost sold out. This speed surprised Alvin. In the letter, Arya also mentioned that through wolf poison potion, they recruited 20 werewolves in just 1 month, and it was Arya who carefully selected those wizards with good hearts, and all signed contracts. The consequence of this is that Alvin has to work overtime to refine a batch of wolf poison potions for Arya. However, Arya also said one thing that made Alvin a little worried. Their expansion has been too rapid recently, affecting the interests of the other 2 major families. Know that werewolves and wandering wizards are the main sources of human trade. Arya quietly recruited so many people, naturally blocking their way to money. But now, because I still can't figure out who the person standing behind Arya is, the 2 major families will not act rashly for a while, but it is always a hidden danger. After reading it, Alvin decided to go this Christmas to deal with these troubles. Start first, Alvin doesn't want to be stabbed in the back at some point in the future. Until Halloween, Alvin would refine potions in his suitcase when he was fine. Cho couldn't stand it anymore, so he sneaked into the suitcase and called out Alvin out. At the beginning, Alvin gave the 2 women permission to enter and exit the suitcase at will, and if someone else approached, it would immediately trigger the alarm. I didn't expect it to come in handy today. I don't think it's fair. Why can't I go to the girls' dormitory, and you can come to the boys' dormitory? Alvin, who was dragged out, still muttered and complained, and received a fierce look from the young lady. Shut up, what do you want to do in the girls' dormitory? Walking down the hallway, Cho complained disgruntled about Alvin's recent behavior. Alvin also knew that he was at a loss, grinned and did not refute, quietly took the young lady's hand, ready to extinguish her anger with sugar-coated cannonballs. Ah! A scream interrupted Alvin's movements. Cho and Cho looked at each other, and the 2 hurried to the place where the sound came from. When they arrived, they saw a few large bloody words on the wall. The secret room has been opened. Those who are enemies with heirs, be vigilant. There were already several people next to him, Harry, Ron, and Filch. The scream just now was made by Filch, who was holding his Lady Loris, and was in pain on the ground. Seeing this scene, Cho was a little frightened and tightened his grip on Alvin's hand. It's you. You killed my cat. I'm going to kill you, Filch shouted hysterically and frantically pounced on Harry. Harry watched blankly as Filch pounced. He didn't seem to react to what had happened, but at this moment, an old and serious voice interrupted Filch's movements. Filch. It was Dumbledore, and the professors came.